Alors, bonsoir. Alors, au nom de la Maison de l'Architecture, je vous remercie d'avoir fait l'effort de venir ici ce soir. Ça nous fait vraiment très plaisir. Je sais qu'on a déjà beaucoup de personnes qui sont connectées, donc je dis aussi bonsoir à toutes les personnes qui sont là et qui sont connectées avec nous. Donc ce soir, nous avons la chance d'écouter Paola Antonelli. Son intervention arrive pour conclure la conférence du cycle de conférences Momentum. Juste pour info, la conférence d'Anne Lacaton sera finalement programmée en 2021 dans un format hors cycle, parce que ça nous permettait comme ça de boucler ce cycle de Momentum. Ensuite, nous vous tiendrons informés très prochainement du thème du nouveau cycle de conférences ainsi que de notre prochaine exposition. Donc patientez encore un petit peu. Et aussi, je tiens à vous rappeler que l'ensemble des activités que nous menons à la Maison de l'Architecture dans ce magnifique pavillon Cycli ont pour but de valoriser la culture du bâti, et ceci grâce à l'ensemble de nos soutiens, de nos membres, ainsi que de nos sponsors, que je tiens à remercier une fois encore ce soir. Je dois aussi vous rappeler de bien garder vos masques, et principalement lors de vos déplacements. Voilà. Alors maintenant, je me permets d'introduire de manière un peu plus longue et précise la conférence de Paola Antonelli. Elle est vraiment l'incarnation de la pluridisciplinarité. Elle est architecte, autrice, éditrice et curatrice. Elle est actuellement conservatrice principale du département d'architecture et de design, ainsi que la directrice de la recherche et développement du MoMA. Ce soir, Paola Antonelli présentera l'exposition Broken Nature qu'elle a montée pour la 22e Triennale de Milan. Elle prône la notion du design réparateur, qui seul permettra une extinction de l'humanité, je la cite, lointaine et élégante. Aussi, ce soir, elle va aborder la question du rôle et de l'impact du design à travers le prisme du Covid. Donc, je pense que c'est un sujet de toute actualité et j'ai hâte de savoir comment est-ce qu'elle va s'en sortir pour nous informer. Voilà. Merci beaucoup. C'est bon. On peut lancer Paola.
Merci Marlène, vous m'entendez bien?
Oui,
Oui,
c'est parfait.
Ok, parfait. Merci Marlène et merci à vous tous pour être arrivés ce soir. C'est vraiment un pavillon merveilleux, c'est vraiment un public merveilleux. Et c'est dommage que je ne puisse pas être avec vous, vraiment. De mon cœur, moi, je rêve de voyager, donc c'est trop beau de vous voir là. Excusez-moi si je ne veux pas faire la conférence en français. Je parle français un petit peu, mais ce n'est pas mon idiome professionnel, donc ça va être compliqué pour moi d'avoir les mots nécessaires. Donc, je passe maintenant à l'anglais. Hello, everyone, and super happy to meet you and to see you there in Switzerland. I wish I could be in Geneva right now. It looks like a wonderful day. I would like to thank again Marlène, and I would like to thank also the person that at the very beginning created this contact, Pietro Tovaglieri, who's an architect from Milan and Mendrisio and a very, very dear friend. I'm so happy to be with you, and I'm very happy to speak with you about Broken Nature, which is a project from now it feels like centuries ago, but in truth, it's just like a year and some months ago. And then Design Emergency, the project about COVID and the pandemic that Marlène told you about. The two are connected. They're connected because all the crises that we're looking right now, we're facing right now in the world, the environmental crisis, the pandemic, the crisis of democracy, the crisis of social justice, racism, they're all connected. Truth is, all of these different malaise, all of these different maladies in the world are connected. And by acting on one and on parts of one, we can influence the whole system. That's where design is really powerful. Design cannot change the world, but no discipline on its own can change the world. But designers are uniquely positioned to create teams. Architects and designers know what they need when they have to take on a job, even a big job. And that's why I really believe in them. So in us, actually, I should say. I don't know, Anthony, are we already seeing the slides? Can I start the presentation? I suppose yes. Okay. Just give me, well, I'll pretend yes. And if somebody tells me no, then I will know. So I will speak first about broken nature. Broken nature design takes on human survival was indeed the 22nd Triennale di Milano. And Stefano Boeri, who is the president of the Triennale, just announced the new theme, which is unknown unknowns. So more of the question mark, more of an outlook towards the future, and more about finding ammunitions on how to tackle the future. And as I mentioned, design is uniquely positioned. You're looking right now at a slide with the cover of the catalog, and you'll be amazed to know that it's the Glacier du Rhône in Switzerland. So Switzerland was the cover of our catalog because we always found it so amazing, disturbing, and loving at the same time that Swiss often cover their glaciers in the summertime to prevent their erosion. It's a beautiful gesture, but it's also a really creepy gesture. This should not happen. What have we done to the world to be in the conditions of trying with everything at our disposal to save it and to save ourselves? And this is really what the Triennale was about. You know, you see here the entrance, it's a beautiful building. You're Swiss, so I'm quite sure you've been there many times already. It's the building where I started my whole career when I was in my early 20s, being a gopher for an exhibition. So it's a building that I know intimately. The smell is familiar, and the history is part of my history. It was always there. It was built to make exhibitions of architecture and design, and in particular to make these expos that were ways to involve many different countries and think of the future and what design and architecture could do about it. So it goes without saying that when I was asked to present a proposal for the 22nd Triennale, I thought of the present and of the future. And in particular, I thought of our extinction. And many people thought that I was being pessimistic, but I started from a very simple, straightforward, clear concept. The human species will become extinct. That's part of nature. It's part of life. Everything dies sooner or later. So, like a human being, when she or he knows that they're about to die, tries to create a legacy, we should do the same. We have no control over the fact that we will become extinct. We have some control over the when, and we have a lot of control over the how. If we can plan and design an elegant extinction for ourselves, the next dominating species will remember us with some respect. We'll perhaps incorporate some of our legacy in the way they live. It's important because everything continues, the world continues even without us. So, with this concept, which is a very much design and architecture concept within the limits at your disposal, you make the best that you can do. We, and I say we because I had a wonderful team with me, decided to set up Broken Nature with this idea. After that kind of dark beginning, the splendor of design and architecture could show the world what we can do to create a wonderful legacy. And here comes the idea of reparative design and restorative design. But before we get there, I wanted to show you a little bit. This is almost like a view of the entrance of the Triennale, what you could see at the top of the stairs, without the Guattari quote. The Guattari quote was a way used in the catalog to connect the destinies of humankind to the destinies of nature. Basically, something that for many years we seem not to have understood. It's like a recent discovery. In Italy, we would say it's the discovery of hot water, is that we are part of nature. So it's not human beings and nature. No, everything is together. So if we want to have a better life, a better social balance, a better racial balance, we have to also think of nature. It all comes together. This beautiful graphic design was by Anna Kulacek. Anna Kulacek is a Ukrainian designer that's living in New York. I think she's living in New York. I don't know where she is right now, but she did this wonderful, I'm going to take off. I don't know if you're looking at me in my face. I'm going to just take off my sweater. So forgive me for this striptease online, but here we are. So she made this beautiful design to make people understand that nature, the whole world, is almost like the body that is mapped for acupuncture. And there are many different ways that we can use to be restorative. And the concept of restorative design is something that I will introduce shortly, but not before I introduce the curatorial team. So you can see that I am there in the middle, and to my left, to your right, is Laura Mairan, and then to the extreme left is Erika Petrillo, and then between me and Erika is Ala Tanier. This was the fabulous team that was taking over the Triennale that is just before the installation. And this is more about Anna's beautiful graphic design. So it was a beautiful team of old timers of the Triennale and absolutely new collaborators. And this is what you saw coming up the staircase. What is really important is to make sure that people understand that all this restoring, being responsible, having mindfulness about design and about the world and about nature doesn't mean punishing ourselves. The old idea of sustainability came with this idea of self-flagellation, of almost punishment and atonement. And that's not what restorative design is. Restorative design is about finding ways to be responsible towards the world, towards nature, and towards each other without giving up the pleasure, the creativity, the sensuality of what we have come to appreciate in architecture and design. And that was really the secret. The Triennale Broken Nature showed citizens, and I'm going to get to that, as many strategies and techniques as possible to actually be restorative. Some of the restoration strategies are obvious. Reducing consumption. Actually, I have banned the word consumer from my lexicon because I think that when you think of yourself as a consumer, you consume. If you think of yourself as a citizen or as a person, you have a different agency in the world. But so reducing consumption, reducing waste, reducing pollution, those are all obvious strategies. But then you can also harness pollution, and we'll see what it means to think of waste as a new material. We can also build trust. By building trust, we start also trusting objects in a different way, and maybe we'll live with them longer. Voluntary digital exile, well, that's bittersweet because at the time of the Triennale, I was thinking that so much of our activities can happen online and that can save energy. And now we're obliged to do that. So look at this. But also it's a proof in the pudding, the fact that over the past 8 months, pollution in the world was reduced at a dramatic level. Blue skies in Beijing and Delhi and all sorts of other few, but some positive outcomes. So in other words, there are so many different ways to be restorative. And what's more important is that this exhibition was not only for designers and architects, but first and foremost for citizens. We really believe that citizens can make the difference. And Milan is a city that loves design. Its inhabitants crave design, talk about it as if it were football, wait for the Salone del Mobile. It's really part of culture. So we knew that citizens would come to the Triennale, and we wanted them to leave the Triennale with 3 different notions. One is a sense of long time. As human beings, we're able physiologically to think of maybe 2 or 3 generations after ours, our children, our children's children, maybe our great grandnieces and nephews, but it's very hard to think beyond. And so we wanted to give a sense of the beyond in all dimensions of time with the exhibition. The second goal was to give people a sense of the fact that we are living in systems. So when something happens, it's important to have an idea of the reverberations. It's not an action and reaction, it's reverberations. To give you an example, when a few years ago, a building collapsed in Bangladesh, in Dhaka, killing more than 1,300 sweatshop workers that were making clothes, some people reacted by not buying clothes made in Bangladesh anymore. Well, that's the wrong reaction, because by doing so, you just exacerbate the problem in Bangladesh. what you can do is use your wallet to make pressure on the Western companies that have clothes made in Bangladesh, not for them to stop making clothes, but rather for them to actually establish workers' rights. So having a knowledge of systems is very important. The third goal, we wanted to make sure that every single citizen of Milan, of the world, because there were so many people coming, we wanted to make sure that they left the Triennale with some concrete ideas of what they could do in their everyday life to be restorative. So an exhibition that was at the same time philosophical but also pragmatic, that talked about money, talked about grandmothers, talked about ghosts, talked about material culture, that was encompassing and clear at the same time. And I have to say that we might have done a good job. I think we did. And people loved it. And more than people, I'll show you afterwards who loved it. But so let me take you through the exhibition. I told you that it was important to give a sense of time. And nothing gave a better sense than this series by NASA that's called Images of Change. It's in the public domain. You can go and look at it right now. It shows different parts of the world before and after. The before and the after might be maybe a few months away or millennia away, but it shows what happened to certain parts of the world before either a natural or a human-made intervention, ranging from the lithium mines in Chile to instead the erosion of glaciers or even of the tectonic shifts of ice in the Antarctica. So really this sense of before and after, and the sense of the movement of time. Behind it was one of the first, one of the 4 commissions by Accurate. Accurate is a company based in Milan. Giorgia Lupi now moved to New York. They're visualization designers, and they did this beautiful visualization, very complex. There was a legenda that was like tough to read, but at the same time, you could spend hours in front of it and understand, or you could take it all in. But it kind of positioned the history of humanity in coincidence and in connection with movements in the universe, stars' movements of the geology of the earth. So it was about really giving a sense of time and our small position in it. And then we started with this first section that was still about time and tried to give a sense of what could be the fossils of the future. The exhibition had not only architects and designers, but also a few artists. We wanted to also invite some of them. And you know, the boundaries among disciplines are very, very thin right now. They're more dictated by the market than by the reality of what objects are. So here is the work of 2 great artists. One is Kelly Jasbach and the other is Mandy Barker. Kelly Jasbach picking up some plastiglomerates, which are these stones that you can find in Hawaii on a beach where a lot of the plastics from the Western countries gets washed up. And it's a volcanic island, so the hot lava mixes with the plastic and you get these that could be almost fossils of the future. And instead, Mandy Barker takes these microplastics and pieces of plastics in the ocean and then photographs them with like expired film and broken cameras. And you get these amazing specimens that also give you a sense of time and of process. But I have to say, one of the great stars of the exhibition was this little octopus, Mercy. And I have a bigger video that I'm going to show you. So Mercy is a female octopus that belongs to Aki Inomata, a Japanese artist. Aki started thinking of the ancestors of octopi. They were ammonites. They were millennia of years ago, and they had shells. And along the millennia, squids and octopi dropped their shells and instead go around naked. Well, what Aki did is she 3D printed with resin a fossil of an ancient ammonite shell and put it in the water next to Mercy. Mercy looked at it, and in the span of 2 minutes, she just went into her home as if she remembered that that's where she needed to be. So it's this beautiful understanding of what memory is, and it's something that flies across time and space. So little Mercy, in just a few minutes, will go in. And it was also fabulous because the sound was so soothing in the Triennale halls. So she became the most Instagram and beloved persona in the whole exhibition. going on, we moved to reparative, real restoration and reparation. So very concrete acts to repair the damage done to Earth. Alex Goad is a young designer engineer in Australia that is developing this kind of trellis made of ceramic and 3D printed and then cast that is made to replenish the coral reef in Australia. So you make it, it's a very inert material, you put a little pieces of coral on it, and then you put it in water. It's going to take decades, but it's a way to replenish. Of course, it also counts on other actions entertained by governments all over the world to make sure that the temperature of the oceans doesn't rise too much. But while they legislate and they do that, he does his own bit. Some parts of the exhibition were also whimsical. You see at the bottom right, Nanohana heels. They were heels designed by Sputniko, a Japanese artist, with the idea that rapeseed is able as a plant to absorb metals from the earth and also radioactivity. So she thought that she could take these heels and just strut around Fukushima, where the nuclear disaster happened a few years ago, and plant rapeseed. Like every walk, she would plant a few seeds from that reservoir until something could happen and the plants could actually try to heal the earth in Fukushima. The next part is about systems that try to help people live with the means at their disposal, and especially about water. Agua Carioca by Uz Architects shows different systems that could be implemented locally in Rio de Janeiro. And you see the scale, it goes from the scale of the area of the city to the scale of the block to the scale of the single building. It's about harnessing rainwater, it's about cleaning it, using it, recirculating it. So it's a hypothesis of how to deal with the problem of water. And community really is the introduction that comes now before we talk about everyday life. Material culture, the wisdom of peoples, even indigenous people from all over the world, is something that just now we are rediscovering. Just this week on Monday used to be Christopher Columbus Day, and it's been moved to Indigenous People Day. All over the world, there's a rediscovery of Indigenous people's wisdom together with a denunciation of colonialisms. And it's a very interesting political movement that's disclosing a lot of material and a lot of information also for architects and designers. So in this little corner were 3 examples of ancient and beautiful material culture. The little woman at the bottom left is from Sardinia, the island where I was born. Her name is Chiara Vigo, and she's the last woman that is able to dive and collect this big shell whose little beard that connects it to the rocks can then be formed and can then be worked to become this thread that is almost like golden silk. So she's able to make still this embroidery, but she's the one that actually dives, picks up the shell, takes the beards and the filaments off and makes them become thread. It's a beautiful story, as is beautiful the story of the Japanese women divers that are in a particular part of Japan, in Jeju Island. And these map office, which is an architecture office in Hong Kong, mapped their material culture, the tools that they use, the kind of clothes that they wear to understand better their work. Abel Rodriguez is a Colombian artist from the indigenous people, and he paints these beautiful trees and animals completely by memory. Some of them do not exist anymore, have become extinct decades ago, but it's about oral tradition. His elders told him what these trees looked like, and he paints them. So it's beautiful to alternate in an exhibition, very pragmatic with very sometimes whimsical, with instead craftsmanship and this sense of memory. It enables you to give people also this to kind of manipulate a little bit people's feelings and understanding. From the community section, we moved into the everyday life. Of course, I'm not showing everything. I'm just giving you bits and pieces to tell you the narration, but the everyday life was very important as to also to give citizens this sense of what they could do. It ranged from a section that was all about women's health. So you had the Ruby cup that has been an alternative to sanitary pads and tampons, which are polluting. It's been an alternative since the 1940s. It was actually the first one was designed by a really clever American actress. So it has been kind of dormant for many years, and it's just recently been resuscitated by very conscious and responsible young women worldwide. At the bottom is the Leah pregnancy test, which is biodegradable. So it enables you not to pollute and also to maintain more privacy because you can flush it. On the right-hand side, super interesting, a commission. I have a friend who is a scientist. He is a linguistics expert, linguistics and AI at MIT, and he has been tracking women's language, especially as related to heart attacks. Many, many women die of heart attack, and they often do because neither they nor the doctors that they contact are able to recognize a heart attack from how they describe it. Why? The world is used to men's standards, right? So the same way building air conditioning in the United States is regulated on men and women are always freezing in the summer, similarly, doctors are used to recognizing the heart attack symptoms of men who tend to be a little more dramatic when they describe their chest that's like completely being pounded by an elephant and the world is going to collapse and everything and they're going to die. Women tend to minimize. They took the stairs, they took too much weight, and their fault, but also the doctor's faults, they die of heart attack. So I teamed up Kartik Dinakar, this scientist, with Irina Kruglova, who's an illustrator from Russia, and they made this poster that is almost like an Heimlich maneuver poster, so an emergency poster for doctors. So I really loved that. This is a view of the everyday section, and you can see some of these ideas, but in the middle, there's this capsula mundi, which is a system for green burial, where the body, the corpse, the dead person is buried within this egg that then gets planted into the earth without any embalming and without any metal around it so that it can really go back to earth. And there's also this idea that a tree can grow out of it. And I was really moved. The exhibition was very moving. I was always flattered when people told me that it was moving, and I was also moved by their reaction. But I remember this perfect Milanese lady, maybe 75. She had her suit, she had her perfect bag, she was completely well coiffed, and she came to me running saying, "Oh my God, I really need to find out who is behind the system because that's how I want to get buried. I have to tell my grandson and my son." So that's really what we wanted out of the exhibition, this very personal interpretation of life and of what design can do to be more responsible. Other examples in the everyday life section refer to waste. Kosuke Araki makes these beautiful tableware out of food waste and Japanese lacquer, while Caroline Slotte picks up discarded ceramic plates that have landscapes and makes them into artwork. Not to mention the work of Studio Swine, who went around Sao Paulo in Brazil, where these people called catadores go and pick up all sorts of aluminum cans. They also exist here in New York. You know, there's people that make a living using aluminum cans. And what they did is they created this portable foundry so that these catadores could take the aluminum cans and fuse them, and then using objects, they could make them into stools that would then replenish street life. Such a beautiful, beautiful idea. And it's about the circularity that we seek so much, you know, the circularity of you take from the street or you pollute the street, you give back to the street. Christian Meindertsma worked with Kvadrat, the textile company, to take all their scraps and make them into this acoustic fur that can be either thicker or like more sparse, but helps you have acoustic insulation on the walls using magnetic attachments. A lot is happening right now in materials, and that's another important aspect of being restorative. The work of David Benjamin and the living is particularly interesting. You know, in architecture, oftentimes the problem with building is that too many materials, especially in layering bricks, are used, and therefore they're difficult to take apart and reused. Biowelding and jammed biowelding is about materials that can weld themselves. A lot of work is done also at ETH. Gramazio Kohler are doing a lot, not particularly like David is doing with mycelium with mushroom mycelium, but it's the same concepts, finding new ways of building that involve fewer materials and therefore can be circulated better. Same idea of finding new materials is behind the work of Neri Oxman. Neri Oxman is a wonderful architect. Her exhibition is downstairs here at MoMA. It closes on Sunday. Unfortunately, it took the whole pandemic in the chest because it opened only 2 weeks before the lockdown. But it's a gorgeous show, and you can find more information about it online. This is a work by Neri that I've always loved. It's about working with nature, truly co-opting silkworms to become construction workers in this case. And in the silk pavilion that is downstairs here at MoMA, they're also architects because there's an evolution. And therefore, working with nature and making buildings that are really copacetic with nature and that will biodegrade and be reused in seamless ways. Ore streams by Forma Fantasma, using waste, in this particular case, electronic waste as a new material, showing Italians that you can make really sleek and Italian looking furniture using pieces of electronic waste, but also unearthing the dark traffic and the underbelly of the e-waste industry worldwide. You might be familiar with Atelier Luma in Arles. The algae platform has been trying to teach the world to use the algae, the local algae that are almost the byproduct of our excessive pollution, to make them into biomaterials that can be 3D printed. It's a little bit like Studio Swine. It's about giving back because so much of what you 3D print can be vessels and objects from your own culture. Very beautiful, again, about circularity. We're entering now in the systems area. So already the algae platform and the ore streams by Forma Fantasma were about systems, but now it's truly about systems. Let me go back to glaciers. Geological systems. Once upon a time, watersheds in mountains used to be also political boundaries between countries, but now they're moving. So what is the disconnect between a political border and a geological border? And that's what Studio Folder, who are also the amazing designers of the whole exhibition of Broken Nature and of the catalog, did by planting sensors on the Alps in Italy to see how these borders would shift over time. A beautiful project that then became a book that shows really how the changes in the world matter to us in everyday life. The work of forensic architecture and forensic oceanography is probably known to you all. They come out of Goldsmith School in London, and they have been creating basically this new branch of architecture that takes the tools of architecture to help institutions worldwide right some wrongs or investigate. For instance, in this case, it was Juventa, that was a German NGO ship that rescued some migrants from the coasts of Libya towards Italy and was accused of helping smugglers. So forensic oceanography proved that it was not true because of how the boat behaved in the waters. Beautiful ways to apply architecture and design. And this is another one, Kate Crawford and Vladan Joler. What you see in front of you is the system that is behind an Amazon Echo, both the hardware and the software. It shows where the mining of the metals comes from, and it shows where the education of the AI behind it comes from in this intricate and amazingly precise diagram that almost unveils secrets that nobody wants us to know. There's so much more to talk about when it comes to AI. The last part of the exhibition was devoted to empathy, because frankly, the only way to make all this happen is if we have some respect and some consideration for ourselves and for others of all species. So we gave here many different examples. This is a Japanese anime that is about a little boy that can see microbes and bacteria and talk to them. I wish we had him around right now, right? Or Goat Mind by Thomas Waits. Thomas decided to leave his humanity for like 4 days and planned this whole contraption that made him become almost like a goat, and then went on the Alps and lived as a goat for 4 days. And the goats accepted him. You can see him there. So he really also created an artificial stomach so that he could digest the same kind of grass that goats use. So it's about eat. So it's about really coming closer and really understanding also other species. Something's happened, Anthony, and it doesn't let me go forward. Ah, now it did. Yeah, maybe make me jump a few. Thank you. It worked. This is instead by Mustafa Ali Farouki. And it's a facility to welcome angels into the world. It's a very political project, super beautiful. And it takes Governor's Island in New York. And it's about immigration. It's about injustice. You know, angels have no sex. So the idea that you have to attribute them a gender when they come in talks about the conservatism against gender fluidity. Then the idea of immigrating, the idea of what it means to become a citizen. It's very beautiful and very poignant, as is the work. It's happening again. So I don't know, can you move it? Can you do it yourself? Oh, now it's worked. Also, the work of Laura Aguilar is fantastic. This is a beautiful Latinx photographer that unfortunately died just before the opening of the exhibition. And that is herself. These are self-portraits in nature. The beauty, the moving beauty of this imperfect body, imperfect to normal human standard, but in reality, a gorgeous body that relates to nature. She used to say that she identified with boulders, with rocks. So just gorgeous, gorgeous work. The exhibition ended with this sculpture by Patricia Piccinini. At first, I was a little nervous about putting it in because it seemed very corny and too sweet, but in truth, it really worked perfectly because people almost cried when they saw this example of love that transcends age, transcends species, and transcends pretty much everything. It's so cosmic. I mean, even now, it makes me, I'm very emotional these days because of this whole pandemic, so I'm gonna cry. Now, so it was just beautiful to end it that way. On the other side of the bridge was also this beautiful work by Bernie Krause and United Visual Artists that used to be at the Cartier Foundation that basically mapped different landscapes in different parts of the world. Bernie Krause is somebody who spent his life recording soundscapes, recording the sounds of nature to the point that you can use spectrography and recognize when different animals wake up. You know, just it's amazing how precise sound can be. And United Visual Artists transformed that into this visual installation, very immersive, where I could spend hours just listening to all these different soundscapes, ranging from the desert to a forest in Germany. It was really fascinating and beautiful. Of course, since this was an expo, there were also international participations, and that was quite fantastic. The winners, you know, it's a little bit like Venice. In Venice, you have the lions, and we decided we would have the bees. So there was the golden bee, the black bee, and the wax bee. And they went, I think, to Australia, Russia, and I can't remember the last one, but it was just really quite fascinating, and the responses were beautiful. What really made me think that we had done a good job was what happened with kids that were doing Fridays for the Future. You know, the followers of Greta that would take Friday off from school to let the grown-ups know that they were angry about what we're doing to the earth. Well, they used to gather in our exhibition and start their protest there. I mean, that really shows you that it was a place that could really be transformational. So I'm jumping now from the Triennale to design emergency. A lot has happened in the middle, you know, Mary Oxman and lectures and books, but design emergency brings us back there. So design emergency is an Instagram program. So if you go to design.emergency, you will find it. And please go there because I am working like crazy on the next session tomorrow. Really, please be there. It's about the US elections. You couldn't care less, but please be solid with me. Anyway, design emergency started out because my best friend, Alice Rosthorn, is a the most well-known design critic in the world. I am a pretty powerful design curator. In other words, we have power, we have reach, we have authority. We were in the middle of the pandemic. We were seeing so many interesting reactions and so many interesting contributions from designers, architects, and even non-designers and non-architects that would become designers for purposes at hand. And so I remember we said, why don't we use this power that we have to let people know more? I mean, Alice already has an amazing Instagram feed, and she had already done a lot of work about design in the pandemic, but we decided to use IG Live and actually have interviews with the protagonists. So we started with, amongst other people, with Alyssa Eckert, who is the woman that designed the coronavirus symbol that you see everywhere. So, and now we have reached already quite a big number of interviews. So I was telling you, Alyssa Eckert and this image of the coronavirus, of course, it's just imaginary. The coronavirus is a gray blob, and actually you cannot even see it because it's so small that you cannot use optics. You have to use an electron microscope that basically touches the surface of the virus with an electron flux, but it's the computer that reconstructs the image. So by choosing to make the S proteins that are the ones that bind the virus cell to our cells red and mean, you give this sense of urgency. And this image is the one that went all over the world. We also talked about the vulnerability of different parts of the world to the virus. So Federica Fragapane did this visualization together with the foundation that spoke about how different parts of the world would be vulnerable depending on their health system, depending on their citizenship, their type of regime, and so on and so forth. We also covered very facetious examples, like Chinese kids that were using to social distance at school, were using this old typology of Chinese hats and actually having the 6 feet around them on their hats. But we also instead talked about really, really serious, dramatic, tragic instances, like the frontline workers that would have to spend days after days wearing their PPE, wearing their protective equipment, and would be devastated psychologically and physically by everything that was going on around them. So at that time, we really covered that part. And then things started getting a little calmer. We'll see what happens now. And so we started thinking of the reconstruction in the future. But it was a really good success. I mean, we would have also the IGTV there, and people could see the videos afterwards. And then Wallpaper Magazine contacted us and asked us to guest edit the October issue, which you can download online for free. So I'm not making publicity here for something that's paid. You can download it. And it was beautiful. They gave us a lot of pages and we could actually curate it. So I am there on top. It's not really me, you can see, and then Alice is at the bottom. The funny thing is that we were all over the world and we were social distance. So they hired a great portrait photographer, Brigitte Lacombe, but she had to do the photographs via Zoom. So basically she was on Zoom. Alice and I and everybody else were holding the phones and following instructions. So what you see there is a really funny collaboration between the photographer and the subject. And you see here some of the design leaders, like Alyssa Eckert, that designed the coronavirus image, or Mark Dalton in New Zealand. The best information system that was designed in New Zealand. Roya Mahboub, that put together a group of teenagers in Afghanistan, teenagers that came together and hacked ventilators and produced PPE. So all different peoples from all over the world. And you see here, for example, this is the New Zealand information system that was like amazingly clear. And on the right-hand side is Frith. Frith designed the whole identity for design emergency. So everything that you've seen is her. And there's this sense of urgency and emergency at the same time, a hopeful elegance in the symbol that she gave us that I think remains truly precious and gives a sense of what we can do in the future as designers. So I'm going to stop here and I'm going to take some time to get your questions and your answers to all that I told you. So thank you very much for listening. Let me know if you have any questions. I don't know if it's Marlène that will come back to the microphone. All right, thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Merci à vous.
C'était vraiment très, très dense. Je pense que vous avez...
Je sais. J'espère que vous avez enregistré, que le monde peut regarder encore
Alors,
avec
on-
calme.
on va essayer de faire un jeu de questions de gens dans la salle et puis si on a des questions aussi en ligne. Est-ce qu'il y a une question dans la salle? Pietro? Tu es obligé, Pietro. Ah non, attends, comment on fait? C'est toi qui donne le... Ah oui, c'est... Là, regarde, c'est Fanny qui te... C'est elle qui doit le tenir, voilà.
Okay. So, thank you for coming here. For really a great pleasure. And I was thinking, should we maybe reconsider the role of plastic in our society? I think we saw that actually we use plastic as the most economic and hygienic material as possible. We leave it all over these months. So do you think society has to reconsider the role of plastic as its importance in our days?
Definitely we have to reconsider it, but I think that plastics is not all negative. See, it's a little bit like the conversation we were having about systems. Some plastics is really great. What matters is to completely ban single-use plastic, so plastic that can be used only once, never again, and make sure that there's a responsibility taken to the plastic that's already in the ocean. But there are some plastics that are necessary and that can last long, that can be eaten by bacteria. So reconsidering, yes. Canceling, no. Everything needs to be done with a grain of salt. I don't think, besides biological and nuclear weapons, I'm not sure if there's anything in the world that has not contributed to the systemic evolution of nature and of everything. So we just need to be mindful to everything that we do and think of it in context.
Merci. Est-ce qu'il y aurait une autre question? Alors peut-être, je pose une question, je me permets de la poser en français parce que je vois
S'il vous plaît.
Voilà,
oui,
je vois
pas
que
de problème.
vous parlez parfaitement bien français. Vous avez dit qu'en fait aussi une des parts de l'exposition était de proposer un petit peu des aides aux personnes, des choses un peu concrètes. Et est-ce que vous pourriez nous donner une piste ou deux de choses un peu concrètes, comme j'ai été très intéressée par cette histoire de il ne faut pas arrêter d'acheter des t-shirts made in Bangladesh parce qu'on pose plus de problèmes que de solutions. Est-ce que vous pourriez nous donner un peu quelques pistes par rapport à ça?
Bien sûr, je vais répondre en anglais si c'est bien pour vous. Okay. So there were many different examples. There were examples that were industrial products, and then there were examples that were more grassroots. One of my favorite communities is Fixperts, F-I-X-P-E-R-T-S, so like fixing experts. It's beautiful. It's about being like the simplest idea of design, solving problems. So it's about looking at people, elderly people, or people with disabilities, or even people like there was this Japanese vendor in the street that needed a better system. So it's about designers parachuting in and fixing things for people. So that was also quite beautiful. And then there were, what other examples? There were so many. Also the work of these two really interesting textile designers in the Netherlands that had done this whole system of fabrics that can protect you from the sun. Because you know, when you use sun filter in cream, so much of that sun filter goes to deposit itself on top of the ocean, and then it filters the sun and it damages the population of fish and other marine life underneath. So they had done all of these fabric or hats with like SPF protection. So there are so many different ideas, and in a way, that is the section that is almost easier to source, because there are many websites, like from Inhabitat to, there are so many websites that are talking about sustainability and that talk about objects. So it's a very interesting research to conduct.
Merci.
Merci.
Ah, il y a une question?
I actually have a question. Thank you so much, Paola, for your talk. So do you think the solution will come mainly from politicians and heads of states, or more from the community, from the bottom up?
Well, personally, I've always believed in the bottom up to make pressure on politicians, but there's no way to work without politicians. I had once this beautiful debate about the freedom of the internet, right? And what was beautiful is that the two debaters were very close to each other, but one person thought that the only way to keep the internet free was to civil disobedience. And the other person said, politicians might be stupid, but we have to use them, so let's use them. So I believe that the bottom up and the governments cannot live without each other, or should not. Some governments live without their people, but they should be eliminated. But so really, I believe in disseminating these ideas amongst people so that they can put pressure. Other people instead work on the politicians, but design tends to be for the people.
Très bien. Ah, en fait, tout à coup, j'ai peut-être une dernière question. Est-ce que, et je ne sais pas si vous savez déjà, mais est-ce que vous connaissez déjà le thème de votre future exposition, de la prochaine exposition?
Not really. We're going to have a small reenactment of Broken Nature here at MoMA that's going to open at the end of November, but much smaller. And then I know my interests. I am interested in interspecies design, and I'm interested in system design. So those are two areas. The problem is that museums here in the United States are all private. And during the pandemic, we lost so much money that we are changing all the program, we are slashing the budgets. So I know what I'm interested in. I don't know if it will become an exhibition, a physical exhibition, or if it will become a book or a project online. But definitely that's the direction I'm going in.
Ok. Ah, il y a encore une question.
Oh oui, s'il vous plaît.
Merci. Oui. Alors, en français peut-être?
Oui, s'il vous plaît.
Oui, moi j'avais une question, juste, je retiens de votre exposé l'idée de transdisciplinarité. C'est le concept où on imagine que différentes réalisations que vous avez présentées naviguent d'une discipline à l'autre. On a vu de l'architecture, on a vu de la création de vêtements, on a vu du mobilier, on a vu de l'urbanisme, on a vu des choses qui sont plus proches du domaine de la santé, etc. Donc, est-ce que vous auriez quelque chose en plus à dire de cette idée de la transdisciplinarité et de la vision de quelqu'un qui a une expertise dans le domaine du design face à cette idée de la perte de limite entre les différentes disciplines? Surtout peut-être dans un environnement plus proche de l'éducation, de comment est-ce qu'on imagine l'éducation dans l'avenir, dans un monde qui devient de plus en plus transdisciplinaire. Voilà, c'est juste ça.
Oui, merci. Well, we cannot work without crossing disciplines anymore. There are some very small works that we can do by ourselves, but they tend to be, the impact they can have on the world is almost like the impact of art. You know what I'm saying? If you really want to have a design or architecture impact of the world, you need to work across disciplines. And I was talking with Kate Crawford, the AI expert that did that work on the anatomy of an AI. She is a researcher. She's not a designer, but she collaborates always with designers or even with artists like Trevor Paglen because they help her communicate. So the communication is one way. Another way could be impact. You need to work across disciplines for yourself and for the project. I believe in it very much.
Yes, hello. I read that you think that mankind is going to be extinct. What makes you think that?
Well, just history, nature, everything becomes extinct. It's everything dies in nature, even nature itself. So this kind of scientific Darwinian evolution of the species, beginning of the universe, thought by deduction makes me think that we will also become extinct. So it's not anything philosophical, it seems to be quite scientific.
Bonsoir. Quel est pour vous l'impact sur le... Quel est l'impact de la musique sur le design ou le design sur la musique?
That's a big question. And, you know, even though I love music and I look at music and the impact on architecture and design, I'm not an expert. There are experts that really work on that. There is, for instance, a sound designer. There are sound designers, of course, that like Yuri Suzuki that works at Pentagram in London. His work is very much instruments. And instead, there's another scholar whose name is Anna Barbara that has published a book about architecture and sound. So it's a gigantic, gigantic field that I cannot condense in a response, but there's a lot of cross-fertilization.
Je regarde la salle s'il reste encore une question. Non. Bon, bah,
Yeah. Are you familiar with the ideas that now there were some studies relating with blood transfusion and how this blood transfusion may increase the lifespan of humans? And in the United States, there is this business that's called Ambrosia. And I don't remember the owner of it, but it's like they can sell liters of blood of young people and to the elders, and they sell this idea. I don't know if it really works actually, but they sell this idea of expanding your life, and it seems completely contradictory, you know. It's like with this, with the sustainability, like instead of being thinking of some projects that you were showing that how we end our lives, how we can think of a decent way of getting extinct. It's like a contradictory idea of imagining ourselves further and further, like not dying, like keep going. Well, there's like these two directions that seem a bit contradictory.
Mm-hmm. So interesting. I don't know Ambrosia. I heard about these kind of companies, but I remember many years ago, I found myself as audience. I was looking at this debate between physicists, there were like 3 or 4, and biologists. And it was moderated by a journalist. It was like people from like really great scientists. And the moderator asked them, can we live to be 250 years old? The biologist started, well, yeah, if we tweak the cell and we change the RNA and the telomeres and maybe, you know, blah, 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 we can do it. Yes, but so yeah, it could be possible, but, you know, they started calculating. And they asked the physicist, and the physicist said, what will we do with all that life? You know, so frankly, you're right. It's a very philosophical question. Do we want to be on Earth that long? Maybe so, but as usual, whatever happens will be in the hands of the rich, and it will go to further and deepen the differences that already exist. I mean, it's an attitude that is very science fiction dystopia in my mind, and I don't know if it'll ever happen, but it's going to be interesting to see how the world deals with it if the possibility arises.
Oui, une question, je la pose en français.
Ouais.
Vu que votre exposition et aussi le projet Design Emergency, c'est une manière de faire connaître les bonnes pratiques, de diffuser des exemples de bonnes pratiques qui sont inventées, et vu qu'aujourd'hui, il n'y a jamais eu autant de connexions entre les êtres humains via les réseaux sociaux, est-ce que ça vous rend optimiste par rapport à la diffusion de ces bonnes idées Est-ce que les réseaux sociaux vont, selon vous, permettre de mieux diffuser ces bons exemples et de les faire prospérer?
I wish I could say yes, and that's what I hope with the work that Alice and I are doing and everything else. But the problem is that more and more social media are starting to mimic and even strengthen the isolation and the distances that exist in real life. You know, right now there are the US elections. There are people that never hear how the other side thinks, never, because they only get social media that are already in their own bubble. There's no discourse and no dialogue whatsoever. I am afraid that social media work within communities and not across, not enough. So maybe what designers could do together with philosophers is to think how to maybe every now and then, you know, like when you have shuffle in your Spotify, maybe there could be a shuffle no, for a little bit, a shuffle command on social media to know what's outside of your comfort zone.
Bon, ok. Bon, bah, on s'arrête là. Est-ce qu'il y a encore une dernière question? Non? Bon, bah, c'est parfait de terminer comme ça. Merci beaucoup, c'était vraiment exceptionnel. Voilà, j'ai hâte de voir la prochaine exposition ou le prochain livre. Merci beaucoup en tout cas. Merci.
Merci à vous. Merci à vous et à bientôt. J'espère vous voir en personne, en real life, très tôt.
Alors, nous, pour la suite, on a mis en place un apéritif ici. Donc, en fait, ce qu'il faudrait, c'est que vous puissiez aller chercher et après revenir sur vos chaises pour discuter ensemble, mais assis avec vos verres et votre petite chose à manger et ne pas rester debout. Voilà, c'est la meilleure mesure qu'on a trouvée. Merci beaucoup et j'espère à bientôt. Au revoir.
À bientôt, au revoir.